Long before the black glass bottle was sealed, there was a village at the edge of a winter marsh where no bell was ever rung after sunset. The people there believed sound carried names, and names carried blame. A spoken name could summon memory. A bell could wake the dead. A song, if sung too late beneath the moon, might lead grief back to the door that first abandoned it. So the village stayed quiet after dark. Its houses leaned beneath frost-black reeds. Its paths sank into wet earth. Its lanterns were covered with thin cloths, so their light would not wander too far across the marsh. The people lived carefully, spoke softly, and trusted those who knew the language of roots, smoke, water, and bone. They called these women herbalists. The judges called them corruption. When the judges came, they wore clean white masks and carried torches bright enough to shame the moon. Behind them marched men with chains, iron hooks, and books full of names written by strangers. They did not come for soldiers. They did not come for thieves. They did not come for lords who had poisoned wells, or merchants who had sold hunger by the pound. They came for the women who knew which root could close a wound. They came for the women who knew which smoke could calm a fever. They came for the women who knew which bitter oil could keep a dying child breathing until dawn. The villagers watched from their windows. No one rang a bell, no one spoke a name. By morning, the herbalists were ash beneath the execution hill, and the judges declared the village clean. But one woman had survived. She was not the strongest of the circle. She was not the wisest, nor the oldest, nor the most feared. Her hands had never been the quickest with a knife, or the most gentle with a wound. She had only one talent. She remembered everything. Every white mask, every hand that pointed, every mouth that stayed closed, every face lit orange by the burning of innocent women. And as the smoke climbed into the cold sky, she made no vow aloud. She simply watched until the last ember died. Before the burning, her circle had lived beyond the black reed marshes, where the ground swallowed footsteps and the water reflected stars that did not belong to the sky. They were keepers of names, not saints, not prophets, not queens. They preserved the names that cities tried to erase, the condemned, the betrayed, the drowned, the burned, the women blamed for sickness they had fought to cure, the children buried without markers, the prisoners whose crimes had been invented after their deaths. Every winter the circle gathered beside the marsh bay and spoke those names into the dark, not to summon revenge, to prevent disappearance. The survivor had been the youngest keeper. Her duty was listening. When the others sang, she remembered the order of every voice. When the old women told stories of those wronged by power and fear, she remembered every detail. When a name trembled on the edge of being forgotten, she caught it and held it in silence. That was why the judges failed. They burned the bodies. They broke the sanctuary. They scattered the tools, crushed the herbs, salted the garden, and poured lamp oil over the books. But they could not burn what she remembered. When the village slept, she returned to the ash field beneath the execution hill. The moon above her was pale and false-looking, as if even the sky had worn a judge's mask. She knelt where the pyres had stood. From the soot of the burned women, she gathered grey powder. From the marsh, she drew black water. From the graves, she collected violet petals that had bloomed where the ashes had fallen thickest. From the broken chapel, beyond the village road, she pulled melted glass from the ruins, blackened by fire, hardened into dark tears around the bones of the altar. From the swamp's serpents that nested among the reeds, she drew pale venom. From the place where the villagers had watched in silence, she gathered something no hand should have been able to hold, the breath of guilt that still hung in the air. Then she carried everything home, not to brew victory, to give memory a vessel. The bottle was not forged for healing. It was made from chapel glass that had melted during the fire and cooled around holy stone like grief around a heart. The survivor heated it again in a vessel of smoked silver until the black shards softened, stretched, and wept. She shaped them into a narrow flask. The glass did not shine. It drank light. Around its body, she wrapped a silver cage, thin as bone and cold as winter water. The cage was not meant to protect the liquid inside. It was meant to keep the hatred from crawling out too soon. For 8 nights, she boiled the first mixture: black marsh water, crushed violet nightroot, soot from the pyres, serpent venom, ash from burned hair, and prayer cloth. Tears collected from those who had watched judgment become spectacle and lived long enough to regret their silence. On the 9th night, the mixture stopped bubbling. It began to whisper, not words, not commands, only pressure. The heavy, breathless weight of guilt pressing behind the ribs. The feeling of a locked door. The taste of wet ash. The sound of someone waiting to be named. She poured the liquid into the black glass flask and sealed it with bone-white wax. Then she whispered over it for 48 nights. She spoke the names of the burned. She spoke the names of the accusers. She spoke the names of those who watched. She spoke the names of those who could have opened their doors and did not. At the end of the 48th night, the liquid changed. It turned violet black, thicker as ink and bright as a funeral flame. When she held it up to the moon, it did not reflect her face. It reflected the faces of those who had wronged her. That was when she understood what she had made. Not a cure, not a weapon in the clean sense. A funeral kept in a bottle. She returned to the homes of the masked judges before sunrise. No guard saw her cross the street. No dog barked. No child woke. The flask hung from her hand, light when empty, impossibly heavy, now that it carried the grief of the dead. Violet fire pulsed inside the glass, slow and patient, like a heart that had learned to beat after burial. She did not shout. She did not curse them aloud. She simply broke the bone-white seal. The draught did not spill. It exhaled. A cloud of violet smoke rolled across the street, thick, bitter, and almost alive. It swallowed lantern light first, then it blurred the walls. Then it climbed the doors and folded around the judges' houses like a burial shroud. Inside the smoke, her outline split. One shape became 3. 3 became none. The world itself seemed to refuse to look directly at her. A judge opened his window with a knife in his hand. He stared into the haze and saw not a woman in the street, but the execution hill burning again. He heard voices beneath the smoke, not loud voices, not screams, a choir, low, broken, patient. Counting what he had done, another judge tried to run outside, but his armor felt too heavy to lift. His breath shortened, his torch smoked black. His courage did not vanish all at once. It rotted from the center outward. A third locked his door from the inside and pressed his hands over his ears until his fingers bled. For 8 heartbeats, violet fog filled the street. Then it thinned. The judges were alive by morning, but none could speak above a whisper. Their children said the houses smelled of wet ash for years afterward. Mirrors dimmed when carried inside. Torches burned low and smoked black. In dreams, the judges saw women standing silently beneath a cold moon, waiting to be named. The survivor vanished into the marsh before dawn. Only the flask remained. The first ones to find the flask were not heroes. Heroes rarely understand patient things. It passed instead between grave singers, oath breakers, poisoners, hunters, curse binders, silent executioners, and those who had learnt that some battles are won before the first wound opens. They gave it many names: Grief Smoke Vial, the Violet Veil Draught, Blackglass Draught. But the oldest name stayed closest to the truth: Blackglass Draught of the Mourning Choir. Those who carried it lurked its nature quickly. It did not heal. It did not strengthen the arm. It did not grant clean courage. When uncorked, it released a smothering cloud that folded around the battlefield like a shroud. For 8 heartbeats, the bearer became difficult to follow. Their shape split in the smoke, Blades slid through after images. Arrows hesitated. Eyes watered. Fear misjudged distance. But concealment was only the surface of its power. The true poison was in the breath. Those who stood too close began to hear the choir. Not one voice, many burned voices, buried voices, names that had been erased and returned sharpened into song. The smoke pressed grief into the enemy's chest until resolve began to rot. Armor felt heavier, blood felt colder. Old sins rose in the throat like poison. Every wound promised to worsen. Every escape seemed already too late. Warriors who charged into the violet haze often stopped before reaching their target. Some stared at shapes only they could see. Some clawed at their own armor, convinced the metal had become a coffin. Some dropped their weapons and whispered apologies to people long dead. The draught did not kill immediately. It taught the body how to surrender. The flask held 60 swallowed grudges. That was what the grave singers claimed. No scholar ever proved the number. No alchemist ever measured it cleanly. But those who carried the draught knew the vessel possessed a hunger with limits and moods. Each use devoured a different measure of its stored malice. Sometimes the flask was sparing, releasing only a thin veil of smoke, enough to bend sight and loosen courage. Sometimes it was ravenous, vomiting a thick, violet-black fog that crawled across the ground, climbed into lungs, and left enemies trembling before steel ever touched them. When empty, the flask felt light, too light, almost hollow enough to be broken by a careless hand. When charged, it became impossibly heavy, as though every grief sealed inside it had weight. Some wielders claimed they could hear the liquid moving before battle, not sloshing, but murmuring, waiting. The vessel refilled itself after violence. Not always, not for every death. It drank most eagerly from fallen enemies who carried guilt, cruelty, betrayal, or cowardice in their final breath. A murderer fed it well. A false witness fed it better. A torturer could fill the glass with a single dying exhale. But the innocent gave it almost nothing. That was why patient killers prized it, and reckless butchers feared it. The draught was not merely hungry for death, it was hungry for consequence. Each fallen enemy added another whisper to the bottle, another note to the mourning choir. Over years, over battles, over assassinations carried out beneath moonless skies, the song inside the glass deepened. And those who listened too closely sometimes heard their own name waiting among the others. In war, the Blackglass Draught changed the shape of fear. Armies expected banners, horns, drums, and charges. The bearers of the flask brought none of these. They approached in silence. A hunter might uncork it before crossing an open killing field, vanishing into violet smoke as arrows passed through false outlines. A poisoner might open it in a banquet hall, letting noble guests breathe their own buried crimes until knives slipped from soft hands. A curse-binder might release it at the mouth of a fortress gate, not to break the gorge of those ordered to hold it. The smoke did not strike like lightning. It settled, it clung to skin, it darkened lungs. It turned courage into a slow internal collapse. Those within the veil did not simply become afraid. Fear was too simple a word. They became aware. They remembered every mercy refused, every lie told safely. Everybody stepped over on the road to survival. For a few heartbeats, the battlefield became a chapel without walls. Every guilty breath was a confession. Every blade felt like a judgment waiting to return. And through the haze moved the bearer, half seen, half remembered, wrapped in a veil of burned violet light. Some said the draught protected its wielder. Others said it merely taught the world to lose sight of them. Both were true enough. No one knows what became of the woman who made the first flask. Some say she walked into the black reed marsh and became one of the names she had spent her life preserving. Some say she lived for many years beyond the village, gathering the forgotten dead and teaching the smoke to sing in clearer voices. Some say she never left at all, and that every violet cloud still carries the shape of her hand. The village where the judges lived is gone now. Its houses sank into the marsh. Its chapel became a ribcage of black beams and broken stone. Its execution hill grew flowers the color of bruised dusk. But the bottle endured, black glass, silver cage, bone-white seal, violet-black liquid bright as a funeral flame. Those who find it often mistake it for a weapon. They are not entirely wrong. But weapons are simple things. A blade cuts, a fire burns, a poison stops the heart. The Blackglass Draught of the Mourning Choir does something older and crueler. It remembers. It remembers the burned chapel. It remembers the women taken first. It remembers the silent village. It remembers the judges behind their clean white masks. It remembers every battlefield where guilt had a pulse, and every dying enemy who fed the choir one more note. And when the seal breaks, the old smoke rises again. Not to blind the innocent, not to comfort the wounded, not to bring back the dead. It rises to remind the guilty that some flames do not die when the pyre goes cold. When the violet veil opens, enemies do not merely fail to strike. They begin to despair before the battle has truly begun, because by then they understand the truth. This was never a drink. It was mourning given shape. It was memory with teeth. It was a funeral kept in a bottle.